Hey everyone, welcome back to Untangled Vines, redefining the rules of work. Today, we are going to start a series of videos. They might be a little bit shorter because I want to try to do these more consistently. I won't say a specific number so you don't have to hold me to it, but I want to start providing helpful tips and tricks and insights in the market of what's happening with the future of work. And so today, that's what we're going to do. We're going to start with how you can build a remote and hybrid company that never misses a step. So, if you're interested in learning more about how we are redefining the traditional rules of work, then stay tuned for this episode. Intro. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start off with some statistics. And I've been having trouble speaking and using words lately, so let's see how this goes. Did you know that 82% of employees want a hybrid work model? Did you know that? And as work normalizes and evolves with the new way of working, a staggering 68% of executives believe the hybrid model is here to stay. Now, to someone who is like me, building a company specifically for remote and hybrid organizations and workforces, that's great to hear. One. Two, this is not news to me because I've seen this. I've read it in the articles, I've experienced it, and I'm one of those people who used to think that I would never like working remotely. It just never crossed my mind that I would not only like it, but fall in love with it and then build an entire software company around it. And so before I dive into the details, I'll just tell you, like back in the day, whenever I got my first corporate position, I was working in a staffing firm and we had the top floor in Charlotte, North Carolina. And every single day I would go in dressed up, suit and tie, all buttoned up. And what's funny is the only person that I was dressing up for was other people, apparently, because I wasn't like an account manager that was going out and meeting with clients in person. Every once in a while, we would meet up with the candidates that we were working with and take them out to lunch or something like that. But who else was I doing that for? We didn't use Skype. We didn't use Zoom, didn't even exist, or if it did, I never heard of it. We didn't even have like Slack huddles or anything like that. So it's very strange. It's a weird concept, right? Like you're dressing professionally for what? Like I get it whenever you're meeting customers and all that kind of stuff, and maybe this comes off weird or I'll get backlash because I'm saying this. But at any rate, that's how I started. And I loved coming into the office. I would be one of the first people to get there. I would brew the coffee for everyone in the office sometimes. And then I would be one of the last ones leaving. It would be dark when I got there. It would be dark when I left. And I prided myself on that, right? And I'm still a workaholic, don't get me wrong. But now I just do it in the luxury of my own home office. And the difference is huge for me because if I think about it, whenever I worked at an office, I didn't get to see my girlfriend at the time, now wife, as much as I'd like. We got a new puppy while I was there. I didn't get to see her as much as I like. Now every single day I spend time with my pup. I spend time whenever my wife isn't at her job and we get to see each other. We get to eat lunch together sometimes. We get to do all these things. If my dad calls me, I don't have to tuck away into a dark office that nobody's using just to take a call so it doesn't seem like I'm not doing work, right? So my mental stability, my mental health, and everything like that has significantly increased. Not to mention that yesterday, for example, during the middle of the day, I went and got a haircut. Before, I would have had to go after work. And that means that I'm going to be stuck in the commute, the traffic, and then I'm going to get my hair cut, and then I'm going to get home, and it's going to be time to eat, and then it's going to be time to go to sleep and wake up and do it again. So I never really had the recovery that I needed during that day, right? Some people might listen to that and say like, oh, well, that's part of work. But there's no rules out there that say that's how it has to be. That was for the Industrial Revolution, right? And I will preface this that whenever I'm talking about remote and hybrid work, yes, I am mainly talking about knowledge workers, people who are working online, people who are working on a computer, people who don't have to go into a specific physical location, like a hospital, a nurse, or a doctor, right? So I am talking about these people, but even at the same time, there is room for flexibility. You think about the structure of work, it has a lot of people confined. And so that's why whenever I mention these statistics, 82% of employees want a hybrid working model. I'm not surprised. And I think that it's been a long time coming, and the pandemic sped that up. And then 68% of executives believe the hybrid model is here to stay. That's not saying that they want it to stay. That's them acknowledging that it is going to stay. And that's important because if it stays, which it will, in my opinion, and what we see in the trends and now what we see in statistics, if it stays, you as a leader need to adapt. You as a company need to adapt, or you're going to fall behind. It's just like technology in a sense. If people were still developing things like they developed them in 1998 or 2000, it wouldn't do that well, right? They had to change with the times and progress. And if they didn't, they got left behind. Blockbuster, as an example, right? AOL. There's a lot of different companies out there that we can add to that category. But what I want to talk about now is exploring the hybrid work model. These are certain elements that you want to think about whenever you're thinking about adopting a hybrid working model. So first, you want to assess your company's needs and culture, right? And the reason that I'm starting there is because if what you try to implement or adopt as a hybrid working model doesn't align with your company's needs or match your company culture, it's going to be an uphill battle from the very start, right? So ask yourself, in this moment of time, what is the most important thing for my company? And if we did a hybrid working model, what is it that employees need? What is it that we need to be able to deliver to our customers? Do we need an office? Do we have enough people in the right areas, or not the right areas, but in the areas that we can all get together? Or do we need multiple locations and allow people to go into a WeWork office or to use Radius, or find a way to just have local coffee meetups in the areas where those people are, right? Or, and I know that we're talking about hybrid work, but Grapevine is a great example of the type of infrastructure that you can implement because it keeps everything in one location. So whether the employees are working in the office or at home or in a coffee shop or they're traveling and working, they're going to have everything at the tip of their hands, right? So that's the company needs aspect of it. Now you want to ask yourself, what type of culture do we have? And that's important because if you have a younger culture, they might be a little bit more open to having a mixture of hybrid, having a mixture of remote, and some people in the office, some people not in the office. So the other part of the culture aspect is, what type of people do we have? What type of culture are we trying to create? what are the things that if we go hybrid or if we go full remote, what are non-negotiables? What are things that we need to make sure that we can do in a remote environment, in a hybrid environment, that we did in the office, that we did in a physical location? You need to make sure that you have those non-negotiables so that you can find a way to make those achievable and accessible in your hybrid working model, which leads into the second call out here, which is you need to define a clear work policy. And this is the thing that I think is one of the most important things whenever it comes to remote and hybrid. It's clearly explaining what the office looks like now. And when I say office, I'm using it lightly because I don't mean a physical space. I mean a way that everybody communicates, collaborates, measures performance and productivity, ways that they stay connected, ways that they can find information and share it, and ways that they can do all these things in one location, right? The work policy is the policy that defines the best practices for your organization. And hopefully you can see the connection of why you would start with assessing your company's needs and then your culture, because those specific things are going to be put into your clear work policy, right? And you do want to be clear. You want to have clarity. You want to have the expectations listed out. You want to have the mention of if these things aren't executed upon or in good standing, this is what could happen, or this is the process of how it happens. Like whenever I worked with HR people, you had like those 3 strikes, you're out, so you get on a verbal warning, a written warning, and then you get coaching, and if you don't improve by then we have to kind of get you out of the organization. And so it's the same thing with that type of example. The work policy should include, how do we communicate? In real time, how do we communicate? Is it through the chat feature? Whenever we have Zoom meetings or video conferencing meetings, do people who work from home always have to be on camera, or can they go off camera? How do we make sure that people who are working remotely don't get don't have a negative experience due to proximity bias, meaning the people in the office click up and forget about the remote worker or the remote workers, right? How are you supposed to support your remote workers? That kind of stuff can be added in there. PTO policy, what does that look like? How do we need to make sure that people understand that we are going to be out of the office? Is that a button that we click in Grapevine, which is there? Do we have a specific template that we put in our email away statuses? When somebody is on PTO, are they okay with not responding until they come back, right? That's going to be a part of your culture. And if you want somebody to really experience PTO and be away from their computer without having to worry, you have to have incorporated and acknowledged and built and created that culture for that to happen. And it's not just from the top, it's from everybody. It starts from the top, but then everybody has to respect that, right? If there's an emergency, which I always find that kind of fascinating, because the majority of the people that I'm working with, we're a B2B company. We're not putting out fires, literal fires. We don't, for the most part, have a life and death situation like in a hospital or an operating room. So if somebody is on PTO and there's an emergency, I'm holding up quotation marks, if there's emergency, how do we contact that person? And what does it mean to have an emergency, right? I was talking to Tammy Bielen about this, and she talks about having a communications charter. And she was like, we're not saving lives, right? An emergency isn't an incorrect text on the website, right? An emergency might be like, we're trying to close this customer, and if we don't close this customer this quarter, which ends this day, then we won't be able to meet payroll, something like that, right? That's an emergency. Let's see what we can do. All hands on board to get that deal closed. Okay, so define a clear work policy. And then this goes into what I was mentioning before with Grapevine: invest in technology and infrastructure. This is important. Obviously, I'm going to be biased about this, but this is extremely important whenever it comes to hybrid and remote. And one of the reasons that we're building Grapevine is because I didn't find anything in the market. Now, don't get me wrong, there probably is something out there that I don't know of, but I didn't find anything in the market that is doing what we're trying to do at Grapevine, which is building the infrastructure where hybrid and remote workforces can communicate and collaborate efficiently, effectively, seamlessly, no matter where they were, where you could track your performance and productivity, and you could stay connected and engaged, and also you could have knowledge management to the masses, where if somebody is working in Pakistan, I mentioned Pakistan, that's where our development team is. If they're working in Pakistan 9 hours ahead of me and I need to find a document, instead of bothering them, it's 5 o'clock over here right now. Instead of bothering them at like 11 o'clock, like I can go to the internet, I can go to Grapevine and search the entire platform and find that. Or I can have an AI assistant help me find that or piece something together, right? So the right type of infrastructure, and it has, again, this all starts from understanding your company's needs and culture, because there's other tools out there that are going to be great to help you with other things like project management, software development, right? That type of stuff. So you need to ask yourself, what technology and what type of infrastructure do we need to be successful? All of these things, if you're not putting it together yet, they're very intentional. You have to be intentional whenever you're building a remote and hybrid workplace. That doesn't miss a step. All right. Okay. I'm going to go through these next couple fairly quickly because we kind of touched on some of them. So flexible scheduling, giving your employee the ability to work whenever they are most productive. It doesn't, what I've said before in the past in blog posts and on other episodes is the 9 to 5 is necessary. It's dead, right? You don't have to work 9 to 5 anymore. As an employer, you should be focused on your employees' outputs, outcomes. And how do you do that is the next bullet point, which is performance management. Whenever I say intentional, I used to run the OKR program for the company that I used to work for. We had 150 employees, and I ran the OKR program, and I was bullish on getting the people to really care about OKRs, because what would happen is we defined the company's goals for that quarter, right? We defined it for the year, we shrunk it down into the quarter, and then we defined from a company, what is it that we should be focused on? What are the top priorities that we should be focused on? And how can we stretch past that to try to achieve more in this 90-day period? And so what would happen is we would go from company level, then we would go down to VP or C level, and then VP and directors. Then we would go to the teams. Then we would go to the individuals. And what that did was, we were 100% remote organization. What that did was, as a manager, you can feel confident that your employee is getting what they should get done by having these conversations in your one-on-ones. Let's talk about your OKRs. Let's talk about your KPIs. Okay, how are you doing on those? Okay, is there anything that you need from me? Right? It's a mixture of infrastructure, it's a mixture of leadership and management and being intentional. So in those one-on-ones, you're having those conversations, you're tracking towards them, you're able to get real-time feedback whenever you have those one-on-ones. Then you go to monthly reviews. How are you standing? Okay, you get 1, 2, 3 months in one quarter. So in that 1 month, you should review your OKRs or KPIs and give them a grade, or they should grade themselves and say, how are you doing? And it's not just a qualitative metric, it's an actual quantitative metric, because you're saying, okay, I'm about 50% of the way done with this in month 1. So you're progressing, right? You're not at 70% or plus 70+%, but you're progressing and you're almost done, right? And so then the second month comes. Now you're at 70%. Okay, you have achieved your stretch goal if you're using OKRs. If you're at 70% and you're a KPI, you still have a little bit of ways to go. You get to 30% or 30 the third month. Now you're at 99%. Okay, that's a win. Let's celebrate. Let's celebrate for the moment. Let's take it in. And the thing is whenever you use that structure, you catch things in real time. You help your employee through coaching, providing resources, connecting them with colleagues who are also focused on similar things. You move the employee forward, you move your team forward, and then you move the company forward, and you cross collaborate, bringing and breaking down silos, right? And the thing is, you didn't have to micromanage. You built a relationship with your employee, you focused on the outcomes, and you were able to see success, right? If we change the way that we think about work to focus on performance management in that way, then we can work from wherever. We can work whenever, right? And if you have the right infrastructure, it's going to make it easier than it is today. Now, the next one is communication and inclusivity. We kind of talked about that with bias or proximity bias. We talked about that with performance management. We talked about that with the work policy. But you have to have a clear way to communicate. And I'm just going to say this one with this bullet point with my favorite quote about communication. The biggest problem with communication is assuming that it happened. So if you think about that, you can put into place what I mean by communication and inclusivity, right? Okay, these next few bullet points, I'm only going to pick a couple of them because I want to not make this such a long video, because I'm going to be doing several more after this. So training and development. So I'm going to talk about training and development, and I'm going to talk about transparency and trust. So training and development is very important in a remote working environment. I haven't seen it perfectly done, but it's a mixture of several different things. One, you want to make sure that they have a good introduction onboarding experience. So they're meeting the team, they're understanding how you operate as a company, they understand your expectations as a manager, as them being your employee. And you're basically setting the tone and telling them about the organization, about the team, about the expectations, and what we're trying to accomplish with our vision and mission and our current strategy. You want to get them on board with that. You want to get them set up with HR aspects of it. So you want to get them set up in their HRIS system. You want to get them paid, right? You want to show them all the ins and outs. In addition to that, I am a big believer in specific department training. So in my previous roles, I've been director of sales. I don't even remember what I was. Director of sales operations and sales engineering, strategy staff executive, and consultant as a go-to-market or a RevOps person, right? And so whenever it came to onboarding the sales team, I wanted to make sure that they had every single thing that they needed to be successful. And I wanted to deliver it in a few different ways. So self-guided, so they have the documents, they have the materials, and they can go through it. Kind of somewhat guided on demand with like an LMS tool. where they know week 1, you're going to go through this, and these are the things that you have to do, and these are the things that you're going to learn. These are the documents to store. These are all these things. Week 2, you're going to do the same thing. Week 3, week 4, however long your onboarding is. And then in person. And when I say in person, I use that loosely. In person, as in you're looking at me, we're on a Zoom call. We're going to have a call that is going to allow you to ask anything, or we're going to do a little bit of training on the call. And then you can ask anything about anything that you've learned. Right. And the reason that I do that is because you're touching on all the different levels of the way people learn. So you have where they can be hands-on and they can go through the documents. Then you have the LMS training, and then you have the virtual training or in person. You can fly people out, get into one location and go through all of it even after the end of this. But that is a huge thing. And you have to be intentional, and you have to guide people. You have to slow down a little bit. Even if you're in a startup, you have to slow down and focus on that person, because whenever somebody is onboarded into an organization, that is going to determine how long they stay there. So you might feel like you're busy, but stop and take the time or make the time to give this employee the right onboarding experience. And then just continuous enablement, training, give them the ability to have access to tools out there like Udemy or LinkedIn Learning, if you can afford it. If not, this is what I've done in the past because I didn't have a budget. What I would do is I would figure out what my team, or I had a little budget. I would do two things. I would figure out what my team wanted to learn. We would actually put that into our OKRs. And then they would go find on Udemy or Coursera or whatever training platform is out there, or where you can download or purchase courses, and they would just expense it. It was like $10, $50, at the most $150, right? Like, what is that to the company's revenue? In most cases, it's not that much. Allow them to feel like they can continue to grow and develop themselves. And now on the other end, the other portion of what I would do is I would find a YouTube lecture series, or I would find just a video that I thought that they might like based off of what they were trying to develop into or grow into. And I would share it with them. Right. And in some cases, we would share that video with the entire team and then have conversations about it. Right. I think people think that training and development takes so much time, but it doesn't. And you have so many resources out there. YouTube's free, right? HubSpot has tons of blogs out there. A lot of what I've learned on RevOps is because of HubSpot, right? Point in case. Now, the last part is transparency and trust. The reason that I'm bringing this one up is because in a remote environment, the tough part is being transparent. It goes back to the quote, the biggest problem with communication is assuming that it happened. I've been in tons of organizations where somebody is building out something. For example, I'll use myself. I built out the sales process for a few organizations. And so whenever I build out the sales process, I make sure that the team understands how the sales process is different than Salesforce stages or HubSpot stages. I put in the seller's activities versus the buyer's journey. And then we go through that. Not only do we go through that, we add resources. We break down what needs to be inputted in Salesforce or HubSpot to move to the next stage. We have exit criteria. We have all these different things, right? But I've been in organizations and I've worked with people where they have this project and they're working on it. They complete it. They say that it's completed. In some cases, they don't update anybody, or they'll put it in the repository, and then they'll say, here it is, check it out. That only does a little bit, right? There's a little bit of transparency, but you need to be able to update people. Now, that's just documents and that's just process. But you think about this, like just think about if a CEO wasn't transparent with a remote environment, a remote workforce. What would happen is not just remote, hybrid, in office, whatever the case is. If something is going on in the background and you don't bring in employees to a certain extent, I know certain things you can't say until a certain time period or ever. So like you have to be transparent with what you can be transparent with. But whenever it comes to that, if you're not bringing in employees to discuss that, there's going to be a certain vibe or weird feeling that people are experiencing. And those weird feelings will turn into rumors. Those rumors will turn into politics and silos. And it's a very slippery slope whenever you're not bringing in your employees to discuss a situation, or at the least invite them to understand what's happening, what's about to happen, what might happen, and continuing to update them on that. And as a result, you will gain trust with your employees, right? There was one situation where we were going through an acquisition. Our company was being acquired by another company, and I couldn't say anything to my team, right? And I mean, I didn't necessarily like that, but I knew we were a public company. I couldn't say that. It could squash the deal if I said anything, and just it would just have been a bad situation, right? And so even though I didn't feel good about not telling my team, I had to continue to be myself, put on a front, and push them to continue to do what they were doing, because if we didn't continue to do that, then we might have not gone through the acquisition. Not just our team, but everybody. Now, whenever the acquisition came, or the acquisition was announced to the employees, I couldn't tell them all the details, and I couldn't tell them that, okay, you are going to be laid off and you are not going to be laid off. I couldn't tell them that for legal purposes and different things like that. But what I could do is encourage everybody on the team to be prepared for whatever. So I'm still being transparent, even though I can't say the specific thing that I want to be transparent about, right? And so what that helped my team do, the ones who were laid off, it helped them be prepared. So they started applying to different places just in case, right? And because of that, they were able to land a job fairly quickly, for the most part, relatively speaking, right? And so maybe those aren't the best examples, but that's what I'm talking about whenever I'm talking about being transparent. And it's even more important in a remote environment. And one of the ways that you can do, or can be transparent and build trust, is by being consistent with your employees. So whenever you have a one-on-one, keep it on the calendar. Keep it on the calendar. And whenever you have a team meeting, keep it on the calendar. Have agendas. And then the other side of it is get to know them inside and outside of the office. Do they have kids? Are they married? Are they getting married? Do they want to get married? Do they have kids? Do they not have kids? Do they want to have kids? What are their hobbies? Do they like hiking, kayaking? Are they skydiver enthusiasts? Right? All these things will build trust. And the reason that I call out these things is because, one, it will help you with exploring your hybrid working model and choosing the right one and setting it up for your team and seeing a better result because it is tailored to you and your company. But also because in a remote and hybrid organization, you have to factor in certain things that you won't get in the office. So those coffee break room talks where you will get to know somebody outside of the office, you have to make those intentional. With Grapevine, we have virtual office break room, or virtual break room, where you can click on there spontaneously, and then other people can join you and have those conversations. So we are creating that. But until that happens, right, like, make it a purpose to build this type of transparency and trust, have it all come down from your company's needs and culture. Define that clear work policy so everybody knows what is to be expected and how to properly operate in your remote or hybrid working model. And I'm just going to end on this one here, which is not a bullet point, but it goes into the benefits of hybrid work and remote work. So for employees, it's more than just remote work. It's the newfound ability to design their work days, right? We want to adapt to the new working model because if not for anything else, yes, it will improve the lives of your employees as long as you do it the right way, right? There are downsides if you're not intentional. But what I like, other than that, is that there's a 30% increase in employee retention. So think about that, right? 30% increase in employee retention whenever you have a hybrid or a remote working model because you have that flexibility, right? Also, just to sum this up, and maybe I'm doing a little ranting. Next one I'll do a little bit better, but whenever you're thinking about your hybrid working model or your remote working model, you have to be able to get the employees involved, start from your company needs, your culture, your clear policy, have the right infrastructure, allow flexible scheduling because job satisfaction leads into more or happier people outside of work and vice versa. Psychological well-being is what I was going to say. That's the psychology term for happiness. But overall, it just gives people a better, healthier lifestyle where they can spend more time with their kids or at least see them and be there for them, for their significant other, their pups. And this is why we're building Grapevine, right? I think at the end I got a little bit disoriented, but it's been a long day. But that's what we're talking about here. And in the next episode, I'll try to bring a little bit more structure to it. But let me know if you found this information interesting, if you learned something new, or if it made you think differently about work and how you approach hybrid or remote work. Thanks so much for listening. This is Untangled Vines, redefining the rules of work, and we'll see you on the next episode.